Welcome back for another Music Theory Bite. In this video, I'm going to be talking about common chord modulations. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then this is the video for you. But you might want to check out my video on modulations in general, which is posted on my YouTube channel. Let's begin by reviewing a few things. First of all, what is a modulation? Well, a modulation is a change of tonal centers within a composition. That is, we go from C major, where C is the tonal center, and we end up in another key, maybe G major, where G is the tonal center. There are three parts to a modulation: the establishment of the original key, the actual modulation, which can occur in a couple of different ways, and the establishment of the second key, usually through some sort of convincing cadence. We're going to be talking specifically about common chord modulations. And a common chord modulation relies on using a chord that appears in both the original and the arrival key as the vehicle for transitioning to the new tonal center. And this transitional chord we call a pivot. We're going to be looking at common chord modulations in two ways. First, we're going to see how we can identify them if we've heard a piece of music and maybe even have the score. And the second is, how do we write a common chord modulation? Say you know you're in one key and you want to end up in a different key. How do you make that transition using the common chord method? So let's get started with the identification of common chord modulations. When identifying common chord modulations with or without a score, I recommend following a 5-step process. First, listen to the music. It's important that you have a sense of how the music sounds, where things start to sound a little different as far as tonal centers go, and then you can focus in on where you think that modulation is actually occurring. After that, you want to try to determine the starting and the ending keys. Knowing where you start and where you get to can help a lot as far as determining what the actual modulation is. Third, you find the place in the music where you first hear the pitch or the chord that's not in the original key, something that sounds like it's outside of the tonal center, and then you can use that to figure out where the modulation is occurring. Step 4, once you've identified where that modulation sounds like it occurs, we typically back up one chord and determine whether that sound occurs in both keys, and then we can figure out what function that chord has in both keys. And finally, step 5, you can label the modulation. So let's put those steps into practice. What you're about to hear is Johann Sebastian Bach's Invention in F major, at least the beginning part of it. This particular piece, like many pieces in classical art music, starts in a major key, F major, and modulates to the dominant. That's one of the more common modulations that we see in Western tonal music. Now, I know this ahead of time, but let's say I just didn't know that and I just heard that something sounds a little funny about it. So let's listen to the beginning part of this up through the first big cadence, and then let's see if we can figure out what the modulation is and how it occurs. So I've listened to it and I heard that it doesn't quite sound like it ends in the same key that it begins in. Something happens in there. I hear some pitches that seem to be pushing me towards a new tonal center. Now I want to, step 2, determine where I start and where I end. The name of the piece is Invention in F major, so it's a pretty good guess that I start in F major. But where do I end up? I can oftentimes look at that arrival point, that cadence, and listen to that and use that to determine where I have ended up tonally. So in this case, if I listen very carefully to where that last tonal center, where that last cadence ends, it ends right here. In C major. Now, from having studied a lot of music, I know that that is one of the more common modulations that takes place in Western art music, so that makes a lot of sense. And oftentimes having an expectation of where you're going to go helps in determining where you start and where the modulation occurs. Step 3, I want to find the place in the music where I first hear pitches or chords that don't sound like they're in the original key. And as I take a look at this, it really is in the 7th measure that I start to hear a pitch or some pitches that don't sound like they belong in the key of F major. And sure enough, if I take a look at the score, that's where I start to see accidentals. My B flat has been altered into a B natural, and that would be consistent with the key of C major. That modulation appears to be heading that way. By the time I hear the modulation, the pitch that's outside of the original key, the modulation has already occurred. Remember, the pivot chord is diatonic in both the starting key and the arrival key. That means it's not going to sound out of place. It's going to be up to another chord after the pivot has occurred to confirm that we are moving towards a new key. So in this case, and in many cases, what I do is I find the chord where I first hear the modulation, and I back up one chord. So I'm now looking at measure 6, and I see that I have everything diatonic in this measure, and that is most likely my pivot. I know I start in F major, I end up in C major, so I want to figure out what chord is in that measure and whether that chord is diatonic both in the keys of F major and C major. So as I take a look at it, I spell the notes in that chord, keeping track of what clefs I'm using, because we did change clefs from the first system to the second system. We're now dealing only with treble clef, and I see Ds, Fs, and As. That is a D minor chord. In the key of F major, that's a D minor chord in first inversion. That would be a submediant triad, a 6 chord. And in the key of C major, where I end up, that would be a supertonic triad, a 2 chord, also in first inversion. Inversion doesn't change on these things. And so I could use that as my pivot. And the way that I indicate that is I will write the name of the key and the Roman numeral that it starts in. I will use this funny bracket type thing, show the name of the key and the Roman numeral that it ends in. So in this case, I'm going along, everything's fine. I reach that 6 chord in the key of F major, and suddenly I'm thinking that is now a 2 chord in the key of C major, and then everything after that should be labeled, analyzed in the key of C major. Now, if you have to write a common chord modulation, there's a different set of steps, but they're similar to what you'll use when identifying a common chord modulation. When starting out, the very first thing is determine where you want to move to. So we're just going to take 2 keys and we'll just use this as an example. So let's say I'm starting out in the key of G major and I want to move to the key of B minor. And step 2 is I need to figure out what the common chords are between those 2 keys. That is, if I'm going to use a common chord modulation, I need to find a common chord between the 2. The way I generally do this is I'll start out by writing all the Roman numerals for my original key, in this case G major, and I'll write the jazz chord symbols, the chord root and chord quality that goes on each of these things. I could also do this with 7th chords, but just for now I'm just going to use triads and see if I can make this match up. So the very first thing I do is in the key of G, I'm going to write out all of my diatonic triads. So my tonic chord is a G major triad. My supertonic chord is an A minor triad. My mediant chord is a B minor triad. My subdominant is a C major triad. My dominant is a D major triad. My submediant is an E minor triad. And my leading tone triad is an F sharp diminished triad. Next, I'm going to do the same thing in the key of B minor, but notice I'm going to actually write these not quite in order. I'm not going to start on 1 at the top. I'm actually going to find that note name and I'm going to start there. So I'm going to start with B minor, which is my tonic chord. I'm going to line that up with my B minor triad from G major. I'm going to start moving down from there. The 2 chord in B minor is a C sharp diminished triad. The 3 chord is a D major triad. The 4 chord or subdominant is an E minor triad. The 5 chord, I'm generally using the harmonic minor form of the scale. The 5 chord would be an F sharp major triad. The 6 chord, submediant triad, would be a G major triad. And the 7 chord Again, I'm using harmonic minor, so that would be an A sharp diminished triad. So then I find all the chords that are the same quality between the two keys. A G major chord, a B minor chord, a D major chord, and an E minor chord in the key of G major that could be used as pivots to get me to B minor. So step 3. I'm going to choose which one of those I want to use. In this case, let's use the E minor chord, and we're going to write the E minor chord as a 6 chord in the key of G major, and then use that to pivot to become a 4 chord in the key of B minor. So let's see if we can make that work. I'm starting in the key of G major, and with all modulations, I want to start by establishing the first key. I'm just going to do that through some sort of cadential figure. So I'm just going to go 1 to 5 to 1. Now that I've established that first key, we know where tonic is right there. I want to get to my 6th chord, my E minor triad, in some sort of lawful way. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go from a 1 to a 5 to a 6. There's my E minor triad. That's my pivot. That's what I'm going to use to get me to the key of B minor. Now that I'm sitting on this E minor triad, I'm no longer thinking of it as a 6th chord in the key of G. It is now a 4 chord in the key of B minor. And so I resolve it as I would any 4 chord. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it from this E minor chord. It's a 4 chord. I'm going to go straight to a 5/7, and then I'm going to resolve out to my tonic in the key of B minor. And then just to confirm my key, how about I just do another 5/1, and it sounds like we're in the key of B minor. And that's really all there is to it. We have to get to the pivot chord lawfully in our original key, recharacterize that chord as whatever Roman numeral it would be in my arrival key, and then move away from it lawfully in the arrival key, and then cadence to firmly establish the new tonal center. Well, that does it for this video. If you found it helpful, make sure you like it. Feel free to leave constructive comments below, and as always, subscribe to my YouTube channel for the latest music theory bites as they become available. Until next time.